Any discussion that describes the key influential persons involved in the birth and continuance of the progressive education movement in America must include certain actors. We begin this exploration of thinkers and doers in the time of the European Enlightenment with one of the forefathers of the Enlightenment movement, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. In 1762, Rousseau wrote a book entitled Emile, or On Education. This book described a fictional boy, Emile, and his growth from a boy to a man. In his work, Rousseau offered that it was nature that created the boy, but that it was society that corrupted him. Rousseau argued that education should be child-centered and that children should only be taught when they deemed it necessary to learn, that nature should take its course and children should determine their own paths. These ideas continue to influence educational leaders who argue for a child-centered pedagogy in education. Echoing Rousseau's belief that nature could and should be the most effective teacher for children, a thinker of the American Enlightenment offers that there are 4 ways we can learn from nature. Ralph Waldo Emerson describes an ideal education as one that offers a child-centered approach and that nature is the driving force. For it is only through nature that people can find solitude. In nature, a person's morality is developed. In nature, there's a sense of respect that grows for things other than oneself, and that nature allows people to escape the destructive forces of modern economies and develop talents as human beings. Emerson follows in the footsteps of Rousseau, laying out some of the framework for what would become the progressive education movement in his writings because he focuses on the individual learner and how they best learn. Pedagogically, one name stands out among the crowd when discussing progressivism in education. In almost every corner of the progressivism movement, John Dewey is considered the father of this type of education. His writings reflected the progressive era striving to answer one question: what are the conditions under which it is possible for the great society to approach more closely and vitally the status of a great community, and thus take the form in genuinely democratic societies and state? Dewey believed that in order to gain this great community, that education would be the silver bullet. In a discussion of Dewey's teaching methods, William H. Kilpatrick described a common scene where a practical problem would be introduced in class, and through thinking aloud, various solutions would be presented to creative thinking. Dewey believed that reconstruction, learning by doing, breaking barriers of dualism, and creative intelligence were trademarks of the progressive era in teaching future generations, and that democracy would be the result. John Dewey lived during a time of economic turmoil in American history. He believed that it was through this type of real-world, hands-on education that students would learn to deal with the practical problems with which they would be faced. William H. Kilpatrick was a student of John Dewey. His mark on the progressive movement in education began many years before he made contact with the great educational leader in a small town in Georgia. Before labeling the method as anything other than good teaching, Kilpatrick fostered the idea of progressivism movement in his first school that he was the principal of, the Blakely Institute. He allowed for a new and exciting hands-on method for teaching geometry, for geography and science classes to go out into the local streams to learn by touching and seeing rock formations and geographical features, for teachers to take students to nearby Indian mountains to learn of native culture, and he even eliminated the idea of report cards and grading of students on a numeric scale because of the negative effects that it placed on the relationship between teacher and student. There are multitudes of other progressive thinkers and writers whose work has done a major service to the progressive educational movement. George Counts, whose visits to Russia in the 1920s brought back ideas for how education can work in astounding ways to fix an ailing state. John Goodlad, whose ideas for non-graded schools took hold in the 1950s. Elliot Wigington and his Foxfire Project in Northeast Georgia. Theodore Sizer and his Essential Schools, and even Deborah Meyer and her student-centered Central Park East schools have done amazing things to foster and continue the progressive movement in American education.
Created using Powtoon.